I was 38 when he came back into my life, and by then I'd already learned that people rarely return because they miss you. They come back because they need something. His name was Evan Mercer, and 15 years earlier, he'd been my husband's best friend. That's how I knew him. Through backyard cookouts, football Sundays, cheap beer in our kitchen, and those nights when they'd sit in the garage pretending to fix something while really just avoiding the women and kids inside. He was loud, charming, always the guy making everyone laugh. The kind of man who looked you straight in the eye and made you feel like he actually saw you. Then my husband died, and everyone disappeared. That sounds harsher than it was. People came to the funeral, they brought casseroles, sent flowers, offered the usual, call if you need anything. But grief has a way of making everyone uncomfortable. After a few months, the calls stopped. After a year, I stopped expecting them. Life moved on for everyone except me. I raised our daughter in a 2-bedroom house outside Cleveland, worked accounting for a logistics company, learned how to fix the sink myself, learned how to sleep on one side of the bed and not look at the empty side. I built a routine so solid nothing could shake it. Until a Tuesday in October, when I was standing in line at a grocery store and I heard someone say my name, like he'd been thinking about it for years. I turned around and there he was. Evan looked older in that way men do when life hasn't gone according to plan. His shoulders were still broad, but there was something collapsed in the way he stood. The expensive confidence he used to wear like a second skin was gone. He looked tired, like sleep wasn't helping anymore. For a second, I didn't recognize him. Then he smiled, and something inside me shifted. We talked in that awkward, fast way people do when they've skipped a decade. He told me he'd moved back after a divorce, said his construction company in Phoenix failed during the split. His ex-wife had taken the house. He was staying in a short-term rental and doing contract work while figuring things out. I told him about my daughter leaving for college, about work, about nothing important. When we reached the parking lot, it was raining. Not dramatic movie rain, just cold Ohio drizzle. He stood beside his truck, keys in his hand, and for the first time since I'd known him, he looked embarrassed. He said, "I know this is weird, but it was good seeing someone who remembers who I used to be." That line stayed with me all night. A week later, he texted. I hadn't even remembered giving him my number, but apparently I had. We started with harmless things. He'd send a photo of some ridiculous frozen dinner and joke about being domestically useless. I'd answer while watching TV. Then it turned into daily check-ins, morning texts, random stories. He remembered details about my life I didn't expect him to care about. When my furnace stopped working one Saturday, I mentioned it without thinking. He showed up that afternoon with tools in the back of his truck. That was the beginning. He fixed the furnace, stayed for coffee, and looked around my kitchen like he was seeing a version of me he never had before. No husband, no kid, no distractions. Just me in my own quiet life. I remember him standing by the sink, sleeves rolled up, forearms dirty from the repair, saying, "You always handled more than anyone realized." I should have known then how dangerous attention can feel when you've been alone too long. The first time we kissed, it happened in my driveway in November. He'd come by after helping me carry some old furniture to the curb. It was dark, cold enough our breath showed. I thanked him. He looked at me for a second too long. Then he touched my face, and I let him. It wasn't wild. It wasn't young. It was something worse. It was deliberate, like two people old enough to know exactly what they were doing and still deciding not to stop. After that, he was everywhere. He'd stay over 2 nights a week, then 4. He left a toothbrush in my bathroom, then shirts in my closet. He cooked breakfast in my kitchen like he belonged there. He'd hold my waist while I made coffee and kiss the back of my neck. And every time he did, I hated how quickly my body remembered needing someone. My daughter met him during winter break. She was 20 and suspicious of everyone. She barely looked up from her phone at dinner. But afterward, she pulled me aside and asked if I trusted him. I laughed. I said yes. She didn't. That should have mattered more than it did. The first thing he asked for was small. His rental lease was ending, and he was between projects. Just a few weeks, he said. He didn't want to sign another place if he might move after landing a bigger contract. He said it casually, like it wasn't a big deal, and I told him to move in. It felt practical. 2 adults, he was already there most nights. Why waste money? That's what I told myself. The truth was simpler. I didn't want him leaving. The house changed fast after that. His boots by the front door, his shaving kit, The smell of his cologne in the hallway. He made my quiet life louder, warmer, messier. I started buying food I never ate before because he liked it. I started sleeping later because he stayed up late. My routines disappeared, and I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt chosen. Then the request changed. It started with money for truck repairs. He promised to pay me back Friday when a client paid him. Then Friday became next week. Then he needed help covering a contractor's insurance payment. Then he asked if I could float part of a permit fee because the city paperwork got delayed. He always had a story, and they were always believable enough. He never demanded. That's what made it easy. He'd sit on the couch looking frustrated, running a hand through his hair, acting like he hated even asking. And I'd offer before he finished the sentence. 1,000 here, 800 there, 1,200. Not enough to alarm me individually, enough to matter. When I finally added it up, it was nearly $11,000. I remember staring at my banking app one night while he slept beside me, his arm across my waist, his breathing slow and steady, my stomach twisting so hard I thought I'd be sick. I didn't say anything because I was afraid of what the answer would be. That spring, he got a new phone and started keeping it face down. He started showering before bed instead of in the morning. He'd leave the room to take calls. Little things, nothing you could accuse someone over, just enough to make you notice. I asked once who kept calling so late. He smiled without looking at me and said, "Work." And somehow that made it worse. A week later, he told me he needed something bigger. He said a business partner opportunity came up, a chance to buy into a commercial renovation contract. He had the labor lined up, the client lined up, everything. But he needed a short-term investment, $25,000. He said it at my dinner table while eating steak I paid for. I thought he was joking. When I realized he wasn't, I laughed anyway. The kind of laugh that slips out when your brain refuses to catch up. He didn't laugh. He just looked at me, calm as ever, like it made perfect sense. He said, "I've never asked for anything I wouldn't return." I stared at him so long, the room felt unfamiliar. Then he reached across the table and touched my hand. That was the moment. The exact moment something broke. Because it wasn't his hand on mine that did it. It was how practiced it felt. How easy. Like he'd used that same look, same voice, same touch on someone else before. Maybe recently. Maybe last week. And suddenly, every late text, every turned over phone, every delayed payment, every story lined up so cleanly, it made me cold. I pulled my hand away. He looked surprised, but only for a second. Then he smiled. And that smile told me everything. Not because he was guilty, because he thought I'd still say yes. That night, after he fell asleep, I took his phone from the nightstand. I'd never done that before. Not once. I told myself I wasn't that woman. But at 2:14 in the morning, standing barefoot in my own kitchen with his phone in my hand, I stopped caring who I used to be. The screen lit up with his passcode already unlocked, and the first message waiting on the screen was from a woman named Rachel. Her last text read, "You said she'd transfer it this week. I need to know before I pay the deposit." I read that sentence 5 times before I understood it. Then I opened the thread, and my whole life changed before sunrise. I stood in my kitchen for almost an hour with that phone in my hand, not moving, not breathing right, just scrolling and trying to convince myself there had to be some explanation that didn't make me look like an idiot. There wasn't. Rachel wasn't some coworker. She wasn't a client. She was 29, lived in Columbus, and from the photos in the thread, she was beautiful in the effortless way that makes older women suddenly aware of every line around their eyes. Long dark hair, bright smile, the kind of woman who wore little workout sets and took pictures in bathroom mirrors like she had never doubted anyone would want to look at her. He'd been seeing her for at least 3 months. That part was clear immediately. What took longer to understand was how much of my life had been folded into theirs. He wasn't just cheating. He was using me to fund it. The deposit she mentioned was for an apartment. Their apartment. I found screenshots of listings, rent calculations, photos of a downtown loft, messages from him promising that once the transfer clears, they'd be able to move in together. The transfer. My money. I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs stopped working. He had taken money from me, slept in my bed, kissed me goodbye in the mornings, and then texted another woman plans for the place they were going to share once I paid for it. The worst part wasn't even the sex. It wasn't the betrayal itself. It was reading his version of me. He talked about me like I was a temporary problem. She's lonely. She won't question it. She trusts me. It's easy. She thinks I'm rebuilding. She likes feeling needed. That last one made me physically sick, because he was right. I did like feeling needed. I liked having someone ask me for help. I liked feeling useful to a man again after years of learning not to need anyone. And he'd seen that. He'd mapped it out, used it like a lever. At 3 a.m., I took screenshots of everything, every text, every bank mention, every photo. I sent them to myself, deleted the transfer notice, emptied the deleted folder, and put his phone back exactly where it had been. Then I got into bed beside him. He rolled over in his sleep and pulled me close. I lay there in the dark, trapped against his chest, and for the first time, I felt fear. Not because I thought he'd hurt me, because I realized I had no idea who he actually was. Morning came like any other. He made coffee, kissed my forehead, asked if I wanted breakfast. I watched him crack eggs into a pan while pretending not to know. That was the hardest acting I've ever done. At one point, he turned and smiled, and I nearly broke. I almost screamed. I almost threw the mug at his face. But something stopped me. Not weakness, clarity. I wanted the truth before I ended it. All of it. So I said nothing. Over the next week, I became someone I barely recognized. I smiled. I cooked dinner. I listened to him talk about permits and invoices and business opportunities. I nodded when he brought up the $25,000 again. I even told him I was thinking about it. He looked relieved. That look still burns in my memory. Every night after he slept, I went through his phone. He wasn't careful anymore because he didn't think he needed to be. There were other women, too. 2 more that I found. One in Akron, one in Toledo. Both older, both recently divorced. Both helping him with temporary setbacks. He was running the same story on all of us. Different wording, same structure. Be charming, be dependable, become necessary. Ask for small help, ask for bigger help. Move in, take more, and leave before anyone figured it out. I felt humiliated in a way I can't fully explain. It wasn't just that he fooled me. It was that he understood exactly which parts of me to touch. He knew loneliness wasn't just sadness. It was hunger, and he fed it just enough to keep me opening the door wider. I called my daughter and told her I missed her. She heard something in my voice immediately. She asked what happened. I told her nothing. She said, "Mom, is it him?" I started crying before I could answer. I hadn't cried when my husband died, not like that. Then I had been numb. This was different. This was shame. She drove home that weekend without asking. When she walked in and saw my face, she didn't say, "I told you so." She didn't say anything. She just hugged me, and that somehow made it worse. I showed her the screenshots. She read everything, every message, every transfer, every lie. Her face changed as she scrolled, not into anger at first, into something colder. She looked up and said, "Does he know you know?" I said no. She nodded slowly. Then she asked a question that changed everything. "How much does he think he's getting from you next?" I stared at her, and for the first time since discovering everything, I smiled, because suddenly I understood exactly how to make him tell me everything himself. That Monday, I told Evan I'd decided to help. I said I'd transfer the $25,000, but I needed 2 days because part of it was in savings. He kissed me like I'd handed him a future. He actually looked emotional. That part disgusted me most. He could fake tenderness better than some people can feel it. My daughter took the week off classes and stayed with a friend nearby. During the day, while Evan worked, she helped me set everything up. I met with my bank, froze any external transfer requests, changed passwords, opened a new account he didn't know about, moved the rest of my savings, quietly. Then I contacted a lawyer, then the police. Not because they'd arrest him immediately. Most of what he'd done was manipulation, not straightforward theft. I gave him the money voluntarily. But the detective I spoke to had heard his name before. That made my skin crawl. Apparently, he'd been connected to complaints in 2 other counties, Nothing stuck. Women embarrassed, unwilling to testify, not enough evidence. Until now. Because I had screenshots, financial records, messages proving intent, messages proving fraud. The detective told me to keep acting normal. Let him ask, let him state things clearly, let him commit. So I did. On Wednesday night, we sat on my couch. He had one arm around me. The TV was on, muted. My phone was recording in my pocket. He started talking about the investment again. He said once the contract closed, we could travel, maybe buy somewhere warmer, start over somewhere new. I asked, very softly, and Rachel comes too. His body froze. The silence after that was so sharp it almost had sound. He moved away from me slowly, like maybe he hadn't heard correctly. I repeated her name. Then I watched his face become a stranger. No remorse, no panic, just calculation. His eyes shifted like he was evaluating exits. He denied it first, of course, said I misunderstood, said Rachel was a property manager, business contact. I pulled out my phone and read one of his messages word for word. His face drained. Then he did something I'll never forget. He laughed, not nervous laughter, not guilt. He laughed like I'd finally caught up to a joke he'd been telling for months. He leaned back on my couch, in my house, and said, "You went through my phone? That's the betrayal you're focused on?" That sentence split something in me. I remember standing up so fast, my knee hit the coffee table. I remember my hand shaking so hard I had to grip the edge of the sofa. And he just sat there, calm. Then he said the words I hear in my sleep sometimes. He said, "You knew what this was. Don't pretend you didn't." I stared at him. He continued, like he was explaining taxes. He said he gave me companionship. He helped around the house. He was there. I wasn't stupid, he said. I knew relationships had give and take. Give and take. That's what he called $11,000 and my trust. I asked if he ever loved me, and he actually rolled his eyes. Then he said, "You were never supposed to make this complicated." I wish I could say I stayed calm. I didn't. I slapped him so hard my hand went numb. He stood up, furious now, chest rising. But before he could say anything, the front door opened. My daughter walked in. Behind her came 2 detectives. And for the first time, Evan looked scared. The look on his face when he saw the detectives was the first honest expression I'd ever seen from him. Not charm, not practiced concern, not that warm smile that made everyone trust him. Just raw fear, and it changed his entire face. His jaw tightened, and his eyes darted around the room like an animal trying to find an exit. One detective, Marcus Reed, was in his 50s and had that quiet authority that makes a room shrink when he speaks. The other was younger, maybe early 30s, and he stood by the door like he already knew Evan's next move. No one raised their voice. That was what made it surreal. My daughter crossed her arms and stood beside me, not touching me, just close enough that I could feel her presence. Evan looked at her, then at me, then back at the detectives. He tried to smile. That smile failed. Marcus said, "Mr. Mercer, we need to ask you some questions about a pattern of financial fraud involving multiple complaints." Evan laughed again, but there was no confidence in it now. He said this was ridiculous, that this was a private relationship, that I was angry and overreacting, that I'd given him money willingly. The detective nodded, like he'd heard every version of that sentence before. Then he mentioned names. Rachel, the woman in Columbus, a woman named Danielle Ross from Akron, another named Megan Foster in Toledo. Each name landed like a hammer, and I watched Evan understand, 1 second at a time, that this wasn't just me. The entire story was unraveling. He asked for a lawyer. That was when Marcus told him he wasn't under arrest yet, but he was being formally notified of an investigation and instructed not to leave the county. The yet mattered. Evan heard it. The moment they left, the performance ended. He turned on me so fast I physically stepped back. His face twisted with something I hadn't seen before, rage stripped of any need to pretend. He accused me of ruining his life. Said I'd overreacted to adult arrangements. Said women like me got emotional when they confused attention with commitment. That sentence hit harder than anything, not because it was true, because he knew exactly where to stab. My daughter stepped between us before I could say anything. She looked him straight in the eye and said, "You have 10 minutes to get out before I call them back and say you threatened her." He stared at her like he couldn't believe she existed, like daughters were supposed to be off at college, not standing in living rooms protecting their mothers from men like him. He packed fast, angry, loud, drawers slamming, closet doors hitting the wall. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the sounds of my own humiliation being shoved into duffel bags. At one point, he came into the hallway holding the old leather jacket I'd bought him for Christmas. He tossed it onto the floor, said, "Keep your charity." Then he walked out, carrying half his life in garbage bags, and drove away in that truck I'd helped repair. The silence afterward was unbearable. My daughter picked up the jacket and threw it in the trash without saying anything. Then she made tea, because apparently even when your mother's life is collapsing, tea is still the answer when you're 20 and trying to hold things together. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. Not because I missed him, because every room still smelled like him. Every drawer still had traces of him. I'd open the bathroom cabinet and see his razor, open the fridge and see the hot sauce he liked. His coffee mug sat by the sink like nothing had changed, but everything had. The detective called 2 days later. Rachel had agreed to meet. I don't know why I said yes when they asked if I wanted to be there. Maybe I needed to see her. Maybe I needed proof she was real, and not just some younger version of me I'd invented in my head. We met at a plain conference room in a county office building outside Cleveland. Fluorescent lights, cheap coffee, gray walls. The kind of room where marriages end and custody agreements happen. She walked in wearing a hoodie and leggings, holding her phone like a weapon. She looked at me and immediately knew who I was. There was no dramatic confrontation, no screaming. She just sat down, stared at the table, and said, "I thought he was living with his aunt." I almost laughed, because somehow that made it even worse. He couldn't even be creative, just different versions of the same lie. She showed us everything. Transfers she'd made, photos, voice messages, promises. He told her I was a widowed family friend helping him through a rough patch, temporary, harmless. He said he stayed with me sometimes because I was lonely and had attachment issues. I expected to hate her. I didn't. She looked destroyed. Not because of me, because she realized he'd been using her too. By the end of the meeting, 3 women sat at a government table comparing dates, transactions, and lies from the same man. There was something darkly absurd about it, like we were all reading from the same script. The investigation widened quickly after that. 2 more women came forward, one in Pittsburgh, another in Detroit. Same pattern, divorced or widowed, financially stable, lonely enough to welcome someone into their home. He didn't just steal money, he studied people. That was what haunted me. He noticed grief the way predators notice weakness in a fence. He knew which women apologized too much, which ones cooked for guests, which ones still wore wedding rings even after their husbands died. I stopped eating. I lost 11 pounds in 3 weeks. My coworkers asked if I was sick. I told them stress. I couldn't explain that I kept replaying every moment, every kiss, every laugh, every morning coffee, wondering which ones were real. My daughter moved back for summer break and quietly took over the house. Groceries, laundry, bills. She acted like she was just home from school, but I knew she was watching me, making sure I didn't disappear into the couch and never come back. Then, in June, Evan called. Unknown number. I shouldn't have answered. I know that now. But part of me needed to hear what a liar sounds like after the lie collapses. His voice was softer than I expected. He said he wanted to talk. I told him there was nothing left to say. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He said, "I still have things in that house. I'm coming by tomorrow." Not asking, telling. I hung up and called Marcus immediately. He said not to meet him alone. If he showed up, call 911. That night, I barely slept. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table looking out the front window for almost 3 hours. Coffee untouched. My daughter beside me, pretending to read but watching the driveway. At 1:17 p.m., his truck pulled in. Same truck, same dent on the passenger door, same engine sound I used to recognize from inside the shower and smile because he was home. I hated that my body still reacted. heart racing, hands cold. He got out alone, walked up to the porch like he still belonged there. I stepped outside before he could knock. My daughter stayed just inside the doorway with her phone already in her hand. Evan looked thinner, tired, but his eyes were exactly the same. That part never changed. He said he just wanted his tools. I told him they were in the garage. He stood there, not moving. Then he said, "You didn't have to do all this." I looked at him and realized he truly believed that. In his mind, I had escalated a misunderstanding, exposed him out of spite. He stepped closer. Too close. Then his voice dropped into something almost intimate. He said, "We could have worked this out. You still care about me. I know you do." And I hate this part, because for half a second, I felt it. Not love. The echo of love, the muscle memory of wanting him. That was the most humiliating part of all. Then I remembered the text. She's lonely. She won't question it. And something inside me turned to steel. I smiled. I said, "Wait here. I'll get your things." I walked into the garage, and that's when I found what he had hidden in the toolbox he left behind. The toolbox was red, dented on one side, heavier than it should have been. I only noticed because when I bent to lift it, something shifted inside that wasn't metal. It made a dull thud, like something wrapped. My first thought was cash, maybe documents, something he forgot. I opened it because at that point, trust was dead and curiosity had replaced it. Under the wrenches and sockets was a black zipper pouch. Inside were 3 passports, 6 credit cards, and a stack of IDs. None of them were his. The names were different. The faces were all him. Different last names, slight beard changes, glasses in one photo, clean-shaven in another, but unmistakably him. My hands went cold so fast I nearly dropped everything. There were also printed bank statements, folded receipts, and a small spiral notebook. Pages of names, addresses, dates, dollar amounts. Notes like widow/insurance payout, recent divorce settlement, daughter out of state, trusts quickly, and works remote. My name was there. Not even my full name, just enough to identify me. Cleveland widow, stable savings, emotional attachment strong. Can push higher. I stood in that garage and understood something I'd been resisting. He wasn't just a manipulative boyfriend. He wasn't even just a scammer. This was his job. I walked back into the house without taking the toolbox outside. I locked the garage door behind me, called Marcus, and said only one sentence. "You need to come now." Evan was still on the porch when the detective arrived. He had no idea what was happening until Marcus stepped out of the unmarked car with 2 officers behind him. That's when he saw the pouch in my hands. For the first time, he actually lost control. He ran, not fast enough. The younger officer tackled him halfway down my front yard. They went down hard, and I heard him shouting, angry, desperate, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. He kept yelling my name like I was supposed to stop it, like I still belonged to him. My daughter stood behind me in the doorway and whispered, "Don't move." I didn't. I watched them put handcuffs on him on my lawn while the neighbors stared through curtains. The same neighbors who'd waved at him for months, the same ones who thought we were happy. He looked up once while they were lifting him into the car, and he smiled, even then, a little smile, like he knew something I didn't. That smile stayed with me all day. The arrest hit local news 2 days later. He'd been using at least 4 aliases across multiple states: Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Indiana. Investigators believed there were more victims, maybe over a dozen, but many never reported anything. The notebook changed everything. It tied him to years of fraud, intent, pattern, targeting, false identities, financial exploitation. He wasn't just taking money, he was selecting women after major life changes: death, divorce, relocation. He found them through social groups, memorial pages, community events, sometimes even church listings. He'd become people when they needed. Helpful contractor, widower, business owner rebuilding after loss. The details shifted, but the core never did. He made women feel chosen after they'd been invisible for too long. Then he collected. Reporters called him a romance scammer. That term made me furious. It sounded almost harmless. Online catfishing, some lonely person sending gift cards to a fake overseas profile. This was different. He sat at my dinner table. He slept beside me. He wore my dead husband's old sweatshirt one winter morning because he found it in the hall closet and thought it was his. That memory nearly destroyed me. I had forgotten that until after the arrest. Suddenly, I remembered everything in brutal detail. Him drinking from my husband's coffee mug, using his old snow shovel, sitting in the same chair my husband always used for football games. He didn't just take money. He entered the places grief had already hollowed out and made them his. The trial process dragged through summer into fall. My daughter moved into an apartment in Chicago for grad school, but she called every night. Sometimes we talked about the case. Sometimes she intentionally talked about nothing, and I knew she was giving me a break from my own mind. I testified in October. Walking into court and seeing Evan in a suit nearly made me physically ill. He looked cleaned up, respectable, like a man attending a business hearing. He even nodded at me as if we were old friends. His attorney tried to frame everything as consensual gifts during a romantic relationship that ended badly. They implied jealousy, vindictiveness, privacy violations. Then Marcus introduced the notebook, then the passports, then the recorded conversation where Evan referred to financial support as arrangements. Then Rachel testified, then Danielle, then Megan, then 2 women I had never met. Each story was almost identical. At one point, Evan stopped looking at any of us. He just stared at the table. The verdict came in less than 4 hours. Guilty on multiple fraud charges, identity theft, financial exploitation, and interstate deception. When the sentence was read, I expected relief. I didn't feel it. I felt empty, like someone had removed a tumor but left the scar tissue. You survive, but the body remembers where it hurt. Months passed. I repainted the bedroom, replaced the couch, donated anything he touched, changed the locks, though logically I knew he wasn't coming back. The money? Some would likely be recovered eventually through restitution, but most of it was gone. Legal process, asset seizures, accounts under fake names. I stopped caring. I could earn money again. Trust was harder. I went on exactly 1 date after that. A man named Greg Lawson, retired firefighter, kind eyes, genuinely nice. We met for dinner in downtown Cleveland. He asked what wine I liked. I nearly had a panic attack because Evan used to ask the same question. I excused myself to the bathroom, looked at my face in the mirror, and realized healing wasn't a straight line. It was humiliation mixed with anger, mixed with random grief in restaurant bathrooms. Greg texted after and asked if I wanted to go out again. I never answered. Then in December, something arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just a plain envelope. Inside was a folded note in Evan's handwriting. I recognized it instantly, the same slanted script from grocery lists he used to leave on the counter. I should have thrown it away. I read it instead. It was only 4 lines. He wrote that he missed me. He wrote that